door-to-door campaigning for Barry Goldwater when she was pregnant with me. So I got my start in the womb. But anyway, I did learn the value of hard work. I put myself through college. My last year at ASU, I was elected student body president, which in the grand scheme of things is not that big of a deal, but it paved the way for my first job out of college, which was working for Ronald Reagan at the White House. And so for a young woman out of college, it was a big deal for me. It then led to me working for two governors, Governor Kayor in Nebraska, and then I returned to Arizona to work for Governor Fife Symington before going to law school. I put myself through law school, and for the last 28 years, I've been working in the private sector, on the other side of government. So I've seen firsthand the impact of government regulations and taxes on small businesses and big businesses. And for 10 years of my career, I split my time between Arizona and California cases. California land use cases inevitably took me to Washington, D.C. with teams of lawyers and teams of consultants to try and get approvals from agencies like the EPA. And for those of you who are students of the Constitution, you know there is nothing in the Constitution that authorizes the EPA. And yet the EPA now touches every aspect of our lives. And I'm so happy that you are all interested in learning civics, because I'm going to give you some civics tests tonight too. But anyway, along the way, as I had my professional career, I had 4 kids. One of my daughters, Elizabeth Taylor, is here with us tonight. So if you didn't learn anything else tonight, you could go home and tell people that you met Elizabeth Taylor tonight. And Elizabeth, I just pried out of Washington, D.C., where she's worked for the last couple of years. She had the opportunity to work for President Trump at the White House. So for me, having worked there for Reagan and having my daughter work there for President Trump, I'm very proud of my daughter. So Elizabeth, thank you for seeing the light and returning home to Arizona. So anyway, I learned a lot about issues that matter to Arizona, from transportation to education to economic policy, tax policy, water policy, all of those things that a governor needs to know. So I don't need on-the-job training. I'm ready to lead day one. But why? Why am I doing this? Well, having worked for Ronald Reagan, he told us all often that freedom was one generation away from extinction. I don't believe we have a generation. I believe we have this election in 2024 when we must take back the White House. And so, notwithstanding the fact I had a great career, I'm putting it all on the line. My career is on the shelf, and I'm putting my family time and treasure so that we can keep Arizona, Arizona. In 2020, I was asked by the Senate President and the Speaker of the House to chair the Republican Legislative Victory Fund, because everybody told us that we were going to lose either the House or the Senate or both. I took that assignment before I was fully aware of what I was up against, because I saw firsthand what the left is willing to do to change Arizona. I woke up one morning to the news that Michael Bloomberg had put another $4 million into our state legislative races. That's about the time I wanted to, find the chicken exit. But I didn't. We stayed, we fought, we raised money, and we prevailed. And we kept our Republican majorities in the House and Senate. But it gave me a front row seat to see what they're capable of doing. And also, in the words of Ronald Reagan, I'm not going to spend my sunset years telling my children what freedom was about. We can't take it with us. I'm going to leave everything on the field so the next generation has the freedoms that I've enjoyed. Has the freedom of opportunity to make something of themselves. Also along the way, I've given back to the community in any number of ways. 18 years ago, I was appointed to the Great Hearts School Board when we had one school. Great Hearts now has 23 schools with thousands of kids on the waiting list, so I am a passionate and long-term advocate for school choice. I want parents to be empowered to pick the right educational pathway for their children. I also served as the chair of the Joe Foss Institute. So Joe Foss was a World War II fighter ace. He came back from the war, and he became the youngest governor of the state of South Dakota. He then went on to become the president of the NRA, the president or the commissioner of the American Football League, and he conceived of the Super Bowl. So of course he was an underachiever. But when he and his wife retired, they moved to Arizona, and they established the Joe Foss Institute. And during my time as chair, we led the Civics Education Initiative here in Arizona, which requires every high school senior to take the citizenship test to graduate from high school. After that, we took our show on the road, and today 33 states in America have the same requirement. So we touch between 4 and 6 million kids a year that now have to take that test. That was a huge accomplishment that I'm very, very proud of having been part of. But that's just a beginning. I remind people that public education in America, when it was founded, it wasn't founded to teach STEM education. It was founded for the principal purpose of teaching our children how to be responsible citizens in a self-governing society. Public education was designed to teach our children the exceptional nature of this great country. It is amazing. I believe our Constitution and our founding documents were inspired documents. And as Shane said, people around the world depend on us. We had the opportunity to have a gentleman named Nigel Farage in our home about a year ago. Does anybody know who Nigel Farage is? So he was the leader of the Brexit movement. Anyway, he told us about June, July of last year, and he said, the world is watching you. What happens in America will happen all over the country, all over the world. And it was a month later when we had the debacle in Afghanistan. And I remember watching that C-17 take off from the Kabul airport, where you had people hanging from the bottom of that Boeing Globemaster. And it showed me both literally and figuratively what happens when America leaves the scene. Chaos and death. That's what happens. So the world is watching us. And I believe America will prevail. But we all have to get in the fight. We must get in the fight. But civics education is a critical part of that. When I'm governor, our kids will stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. They will learn to love their country, not hate their country. And they will learn that 2 + 2, in fact, still equals 4. There's this thing called the truth. And that may be the challenge of our life, is to discern and discover the truth, and to pass that on to our children. And I will do everything I can as governor to make sure our children understand the exceptional nature of this country. Also, I served as the civic leader. Jeff mentioned I was a civic leader for the United States Air Force. I started out as the honorary commander at Luke Air Force Base, and I quickly worked my way up as the commanders group at Air Education Training Command in San Antonio. And since 2005, I've served under 5 chiefs and 5 secretaries of the Air Force. They've had me all over the world on mission briefs. Into Afghanistan, did a corkscrew landing into Bagram Air Force Base. I've seen a lot, but the most important things I've seen have been the young men and women willing to give life and limb so that we can do what we do, blissfully going about our business, building our businesses, raising our families. It's for them that I'm doing this. It's for the people that have given their life and limb so that we can all enjoy the freedoms that we have. And it's for the next generation, and I want to pay it forward. Because like I said earlier, I'm not going to spend my sunset years telling my children what freedom was like. I've also served, as Jeff mentioned, I served on the Arizona Board of Regents. And a lot of people are like, oh no, she served on the big bad Board of Regents. And my response is, where have you been? Conservatives left the field decades ago, and we're now paying the price for it. We are paying the price for it. And I can tell you a lot of good things our universities are doing, but I have seen firsthand there's a lot of rot in the bowels of the university system. In fact, my son, who's now going to be a senior at Texas A&M, when I dropped him off to school, I went to his orientation. And up on the big screen at orientation were all the classes that you had to take in order to graduate from Texas A&M. And up on the screen was a requirement that you have to have 6 hours of American history and American government. So I thought, okay, that doesn't seem too unusual. So I come home to Arizona and I asked the board staff, I said, how many hours of American history and American government do our kids need to graduate from an Arizona university? Guess what the answer was? Zero. So we spent 2 years to adopt a policy that now requires our kids to have American history and American government. But it was a battle. And it was a battle that exposed the true intent of the leftists in the universities. We think of civic engagement, civic knowledge. When we think of that, we think of our founding documents. We think of the Constitution. We think of the Bill of Rights. We think of the Declaration of Independence. They think of civic engagement. When they say civic engagement, they're talking about sending your kid down to protest. They're talking about throwing a Molotov cocktail through the courthouse window in Portland. That's their idea of civic engagement. That is not my idea, and I don't believe it's your idea of civic engagement either. So we battled. We had to go back twice because they weren't listening to us. And I believed that we succeeded. And when I left the Board of Regents, I told my colleagues, your job has just begun, because now you have to worry about exactly what they're teaching. Are they going to teach 1619, or are they going to teach 1776? Well, I have reason to believe they're not listening to us. And all I can say is, as governor, I'll have a heck of a lot more authority and power over the universities than I did as one member of the Board of Regents. And so the good news is, I'll bring that perspective with me to the table. So, civics lesson. I talked about my 10 years of time when I had to go back to DC, and every time I come back, I'd be a little more depressed that the federal government's broken. So I learned a lot about the administrative state, which is a bunch of unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. So here's my question. And Shane, I'm not sure I'm going to allow you to answer because you probably know the answer. How many crimes are enumerated in the Constitution? And my staff can't answer either because they've heard this too many times. There are 3 crimes: counterfeiting, treason, and piracy. How many statutes, federal statutes, have been promulgated from Congress, signed into law by the President? How many federal statutes are on the books that carry criminal sanctions? Too many? That's a good answer. 5,000. 5,000 laws that could put any one of us in jail. How many rules, how many federal rules are on the books that carry criminal sanctions? These are rules that have been promulgated by bureaucrats, unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. 300,000. That's the definition of tyranny. That is tyranny, and that's what we're dealing with. So among the many accomplishments of President Trump, the one of many that I'm most proud that he did, he rolled back 8 regulations for every 1 new one. That was huge. That was huge, to rein in the administrative state, and that is going to be the challenge of our generation, is to rein in the administrative state. Okay, so enough about what I've done in the past. My political philosophy: I am a fiscal constitutional conservative, and I'm unapologetic about that. I too, like all of you, believe our rights flow from God and not the government. I believe in limited government and the rule of law. I would give you my Constitution speech, but you got one already tonight, but I like to give my four favorite numbers: 1, 2, 5, and 10. And most people don't talk about the Fifth Amendment, but I like talking about the Fifth Amendment. But the First Amendment: freedom of speech and religious liberty. John Adams told us this Constitution was written for a moral and religious people, and it is wholly inadequate for the governance of any other. And as a society, we've taken God out of everything. So is there any wonder why we have chaos in our families, our neighborhoods, our schools, and our borders? We have got to get back to our founding principles of a moral and religious people. And I am unafraid to talk about that, because the current trajectory we are on is not good, and it is not sustainable. And freedom of speech, when I was on the Board of Regents, I fought very, very hard in defense of the First Amendment. In fact, last year I was given a national award. Of all the thousands of regents and trustees across this country, I was honored for the work that I did at our universities to support and defend our freedom of speech. Second Amendment. Anybody here know what the Second Amendment is? Okay, so I come from a family of hunters. In fact, La Sendas, if anybody knows where La Sendas is, that was completely undeveloped land. That was my backyard. My brother and I would come home from school and we'd go out there and go quail hunting after school. But if my family relied on me to feed them with my hunting skills, they would probably starve. I also have at my house what I call a collection, and I can defend my family. They call it an arsenal in California. But the Second Amendment wasn't there for the hunters. The Second Amendment was there for one reason, and that's to protect the individual from the tyranny of government. Period. Period. I read this the other day, and I thought it was kind of funny, but it says it all. If they want to try and take guns out of the hands of Americans, that's like trying to take pee out of a pool. Not going to happen. It is not going to happen. So First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fifth Amendment. As a land use lawyer, the Fifth Amendment has been near and dear to my heart for 30 years. It is due process and the protection of private property. So one of the many things that makes America great is the ability to own the fruit of your physical and intellectual labor and pass it on to your children. And government taxation and regulations is a form of confiscation of our private property. So we have to fight with everything we have. And when I'm governor, we will continue to have a low tax, low regulatory environment, so you can keep more of your hard-earned work that results in private property, whether it's your physical or intellectual work. And then, of course, the 10th Amendment. Shane took my thunder with the 10th Amendment. The states created the federal government. The federal government did not create the states. Somehow, it's like a wrestling match. Somehow we've allowed them to get on top, and we have to push back. There are 36 governor's races this year across this country. And I pray every single day that we will have a Republican sweep in the governor's offices, because it's going to be the governors that save this country. It will be. If COVID taught us anything, it taught us that governors matter. They matter. So my priorities, if any of you have seen my ads, my priority number one is the border. It is the border, full stop. We are the front lines of the 50-state border war. I quit calling it a crisis. It is a border war. People have asked me to take my border ads down, and I say, have you been there? Of course, no, they haven't. I have been down there multiple times. I was in Yuma last week, I was in Yuma 3 weeks ago, I've been to Cochise County, Santa Cruz County. Every time I go down there, I learn something new. And it's far beyond just national security, which is, we shouldn't have to have any other reason to have border security than national security. But the human tragedy that is unfolding between the sex trafficking, the human smuggling, and the drugs. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to connect the dots between the precursor ingredients for fentanyl coming from China, to the Mexican cartels, to a neighborhood near you. This is a war. They know exactly what they're doing to us. We must stop it. I just received the endorsement of the Arizona Police Association, several other police agencies in the state troopers, the national troopers, Tucson Police, Combined Law Enforcement Association of Arizona, the Tempe Police, because they know I will be the law and order candidate. I will be the law and order governor. I will have their back. Whether it's the border sheriffs who need help with the border problems, or it's the local police. I have made it very, very clear that if any city in this state attempts to defund their police, we will defund that city.
Amen.
The number one job of a governor is to keep the people and property of their state safe. Nothing else matters. If we can't keep our communities safe, if we can't have respect for the rule of law, you can't do anything else. So I am passionate about defending our police and the rule of law and keeping the people and property of the state of Arizona safe. I'm passionate about education. Like I said, I served on my kids' school board, so I have a lot of perspective when it comes to K-12 education. I also have a lot of perspective and experience when it comes to our higher education. I believe our system today is designed for the adults and not the kids. We continue to pour money into the top of the sieve, and it gets laundered through the bureaucracy, and pennies on the dollar make it into the classroom. I want to reverse that. I want the money to walk into the classroom. I want our taxpayer dollars to go into the classroom through our children, and I want parents to decide. And I believe our kids deserve it. Your outcomes, your educational outcomes should not depend on what your zip code is. Every child deserves a chance. Every parent should be in control of their child's education. And the one-size-fits-all education system of 40 years ago is a relic of the past. It is a relic of the past. Okay, I'm getting the hook because I got to wrap up, but I want to talk about election integrity and security. So, anybody here think the right guy's in the White House? Okay, the door is right back there. If you do, you're in the wrong place. The wrong guy is in the White House. A lot of bad things happened in 2020. Between judges across this country ushering in new rules in the days and weeks and months leading up to the election, to the media suppressing the news, I don't need to say anything more than Hunter Biden, to big tech suppressing conservative voices, to unattended ballot boxes, all of that. Disaster. We need to fix what we can. But I've taken some flack because I want to focus on 2020, because we've got to keep Arizona in Republican hands for 2024. Arizona is and will be a battleground state in 2024, and if we want to kick this guy out of the White House, we have to win Arizona. We must win Arizona. And I also tell people, the Democrats, the left, Joe Biden, wants all of us fighting. They want us in a circular firing squad. Because what they're doing, and they do it really well, they're 10 steps ahead of us. And everywhere I go, I'm sharing with everybody something I recently learned. So in March of 2021, Joe Biden signed an executive order directing every agency of the federal government, every agency, to prepare plans to increase voter turnout in heavily Democrat areas. So the $470 million that Mark Zuckerberg spent in the last election is going to look like child's play compared to what Joe Biden has planned for us. So all these plans, based on that executive order, all these plans were due into the Assistant to the President for Domestic Policy within 200 days. That was last September. Guess who the Assistant to the President for Domestic Policy is? Susan Rice. So when we discovered this, it was Molly Hemingway from the Federalist. So if anybody wants homework tonight, look up. She just published an article last week about what's going on with this executive order. Molly Hemingway at the Federalist. Anyway, when we attempted to get copies of these policies, we learned that that office is protected from Freedom of Information Act requests. They don't want us to know what they're planning to do. But when they have and control the levers of all the power in the federal government, just in the Department of Education, another unconstitutional federal agency, by the way, given to us by Jimmy Carter, they touch 19 million students in higher education. So I'm sure their plan that they submitted to the Biden White House has something to do with teaching these 19 million students how to vote and where to vote. And then you multiply that, the Department of Agriculture, who administers the WIC program and the SNAP program. They're going to be telling all those people how to vote, where to vote. Or the IRS touches every single one of us. This is what the left does, and they do it very, very well. They're out here 10 steps ahead of us, and they're laughing at us as we're in a circular firing squad. So we have to fix what we can. We have to fix what we can, but we can't lose sight of the fact that they think in ways that we don't even fathom. So anyway, that is, I'm getting the nod that I gotta hush up here and take questions, but I love this state. I have been immensely blessed my entire life with opportunity, and I want the next generation to have the same opportunities that I had to succeed and to live the American dream. This state, this country is worth it. It's worth fighting. And this is not an election for spectators, and that's why I chose to step in the breach and get in the arena and fight. Yes?
Hi, Karrin. You touched a lot on education. You had a lot of experience there. You're going to have to work with somebody, the superintendent. Who are you endorsing?
Oh, wow. Well, I'll tell you, I have not endorsed anybody as a statewide candidate for office. I haven't endorsed anybody in any of the races.
Who do you like?
Well, the person I would like to run for superintendent didn't run for superintendent. She's running for another office. But I want somebody that I can be a partner with, somebody who Arizona can be and should be the leader in reimagining education in America. I'll tell you some of the people I rely on. In fact, I had a conversation with Betsy DeVos, the former Secretary of Education, about a month ago. She knows what we're doing in Arizona. Newt Gingrich, also. Newt is a huge education reformer. He just endorsed me today because he knows what I want to do here when it comes to education reform. If we can't do it in Arizona, nobody can. We're going to fight the teachers' unions. I already have a target on my back from the teachers' unions, and that target's just going to get bigger, but that's okay.
So new guard or old guard?
Pardon me?
New guard, new people running, or others that have been there before?
I want a reformer in that office. I want a reformer that will agree with me that we need to teach our children the exceptional nature of this country. Teach our children to love this country, not hate this country. That, to me, if we don't do that...
Hi, thank you for coming. What are we going to do about our food situation and the limitations that we're putting on our farmers with fertilizer, the killing of millions of chickens and things like that. We're going to be in a crisis, and I'm not sure who's behind all of this, you know.
That's, I don't know who's behind it either. But there are so many, between the FDA, USDA, EPA, they control everything we do. The EPA, I talked about the Department of Education that was a gift from Carter to the teachers union. The EPA was started by an executive order of Richard Nixon. I'm sure he had some good reason for it, but it has completely gone awry. And I worked in natural resource management, land use, and so forth. The EPA was the bane of our existence. I had one case where we spent $80 million in 10 years to try and get a piece of paper out of the EPA. We finally got it at the end of the Trump administration, only to have it ripped up as soon as Joe Biden came into office. They touch everything we do. And yet, down in Yuma, which Yuma provides 95% of the lettuce to America during the winter season, the illegal immigrants are traipsing through these crops, defecating, urinating, and these crops have to be destroyed. Where's the EPA? Where's the EPA? They're letting it happen. So I wish I had a good answer to your question.
Karrin,
Yes.
I appreciate you learned the value of a quarter. My question is based on Article 1, Section 10 of the Federal Constitution that only authorizes the states to use gold and silver coin as a tender of all debts. The entire Federation hasn't been using money in this country for over 100 years almost now. And we've got $30 trillion of Federal Reserve notes in debt. So what would you do as governor to restore constitutional money back to our nation?
Well, I wish I could wave a wand and do it. I can't, it's a federal issue. But I tell you what they're doing in Washington right now to devalue what currency we do have, you may have heard this, I just heard in the last couple of weeks, 30% of all the money printed, paper money printed in this country has been printed in the last 18 months. And then we wonder why we have inflation. And it's not attached to anything. You know who holds more U.S. currency than anyone else in the world? The Chinese. So I appreciate where you're coming from.
Actually, it's not a federal issue. The states have the right to actually institute it because the federal constitution authorizes it. So it's not a federal issue. It's also a national issue.
Well, it's a national security issue at the end of the day. I wish I had a good...
I've got 30 trillion reasons why it is.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. I've been hearing a growing number of voices talking about abolishing the state income tax. How do you feel?
I will advocate for the lowest possible tax rates across the board, whether it's property tax, sales tax, income tax. I would love, if you look at states like, I think there's 9 states without income taxes, including Texas, Florida. In those states, the vast majority of the property is private property. 90+% in Texas is owned privately. In Arizona, only 17% of our property is privately owned. We have 83% of the property, the land mass in Arizona, that is owned in public hands. Federal government, tribal government, and state government, state trust. 9.2 million acres in state trust. So we have a different property situation. So we can't, if you cut one place and it's like a toothpaste tube. And, we can't put the entire tax burden or a disproportionate share of the tax burden on on property owners because there's only 17% of the land in Arizona carrying the load. So, yes, I would love to get rid of the income tax. But because of the unique dynamics of our property ownership in Arizona, we got to do everything we can to keep the whole tax burden as low as possible. We have to do that, and that's in large part why Arizona's economy has been booming, because our legislature and our governor has kept the tax burden low. We now are going to have the lowest flat tax in America, which is great. If we can continue to push it lower, that's great, and that comes from cutting government, cutting wherever we can. Got a lot of hands. Yes, sir.
Hi, thanks for being here. I have a question in regards to executive orders. Governor Ducey did a lot of executive orders. Presidents are doing a lot of executive orders. Can you tell me what your plan is as governor right, to use executive orders? And if you plan on using them, where are they in the Constitution that you have the authority to use it? And if you're not planning on using it, then what are you going to do to get rid of the power of executive orders?
Well, I do support the limitations, certainly the limitations they put on it this year.